Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Books of X, the X-Men podcast focused specifically on the Jonathan Hickman era of X-Men. I am your host, Neil Bogenreiter, host of X, and with me is the editor emeritus of Spidey Dude Radio Network, Zach Joyner, who has decided to give me this program. How are you doing today, Zach?
It is a pleasure to be here, and I'm happy to see our newest show set its wings, spread its wings, so to speak. We've been talking about this for a long time. Maybe go into development, and we've been talking about it for a long time. So the fact that we're finally here and we're finally, making the step forward and doing this as a thank you to our ever growing Patreons. Patreon.com.
Yeah, this is a reminder. This is for the Patreon subscribers. This is for you guys. It's sort of a thank you. Of course, the first 3 episodes, and I said 3, we'll get into that in just a second, are going to be free to all viewers. But episodes 4 and onwards will be Patreon exclusive for 6 months before eventually transitioning to being available online for all. But because patrons are so good to us, they're for you guys first. You guys get exclusive first access.
And this is we've been rolling out over time, and we can talk about it also very briefly. Voices from the Eyrie is also going to video only for Patreons, and then audio editions will still be coming out regularly. But for video, so if you want to see the Gregs and Jen and whoever they're interviewing, you'll be able to see that on our Patreon page. So that's kind of, we want to, we don't want to do that necessarily with Make My Mayday and Spidey Experience, but with this show, we have the patrons in mind, and so this is, initially
this is for them.
Yeah, this is for them.
So okay. Initially, this episode was going to focus on the first 6 issues of House and Powers of X, which is the 12-issue epic of Jonathan Hickman's X-Men saga. But then a talk with Kelly kind of made me realize I'm putting way too much burden on myself, not just myself, but also my co-hosts. So what Zach and I decided was we were going to split it down 3 ways. Episode 1 is going to contain House and Powers issues 1 through 2, which is 4 issues. Episode 2 is going to be House and Powers 3 and 4, and then episode 3 is going to be House and Powers number 5 and 6. So I will amend that on the Discord page when it comes to it, but for the time being, it's going to be those 3 episodes, and then we'll transition to Dawn of X.
So one thing I will say, too, if you haven't joined our Patreon or our Patreon, if you haven't joined our Patreon, join it. But if you have not joined our Discord, the link is down in the description below.
Yes. So we're not going to be talking about, in this episode at least, we're not just going to be talking about House and Powers. We're going to be talking about the era leading into House and Powers, but also the marketing around House and Powers. Because I think those are kind of foundationally important to understanding why this era is so important and where kind of the comparisons to other eras come into play. So I guess we should start back in, 2015, because that's kind of when this all really starts. So 2015 was kind of a linchpin era in Marvel's publishing history. Because at this point, the MCU was kind of only at the halfway point of the Infinity Saga. Like Age of Ultron had just come out at this point, and Jonathan Hickman was creating. Was Secret Wars really early February 2015? I think was when it came out.
Yeah, that was definitely a period of time where Secret Wars was starting to wrap up, and Hickman's run. And to explain Secret Wars briefly, Hickman's run was basically a culmination of everything he had done previous
on his Fantastic Four and his Avengers runs. So it was sort of
it was like the all these mega arcs kind of converging in and imploding, so to speak, with Secret Wars, and it was supposed to be the last thing he wrote for Marvel. And so
because I remember he got into an argument, and it was just something that happened with Rick Remender, where he wanted to do a certain X-Men story where the then schismed factions of Cyclops and Storm's X-Men would come together and in like the final days of the Marvel universe. But Brian Bendis allegedly got, I guess, the green light to do what he wanted, and that kind of pissed off Hickman. So he was like, "I'm out."
Because let's face it, I mean, this basically had carte blanche to do whatever he wanted.
And he was kind of Marvel's superstar writer still before he left for DC in 2017.
Yeah, so to kind of explain that for a little bit, Bendis, comes on the scene in 2000 with Ultimate Spider-Man and the Ultimate line of comics, and it transformed sort of the house style of how Marvel was being written. So no longer was it, 3 to 4 issue arcs, 2, single issue stories. That was not the norm anymore. It was these big 6 issue long arcs, writing for the trade, decompressed, and that was kind of the style. And basically Bendis, because he was the guy that had turned the Avengers around into a actual real property in terms of the comic side of things, and taken the Fantastic Four in the wilderness for a long time and kind of turned them into a dynamite property. So the scene power struggle between the two is interesting to me, because like both of these guys in their respective eras were really instrumental in turning things around for Marvel in some cases.
Yeah, and this kind of leads into what happened after Secret Wars. So, like I said, we're kind of going into the MCU period, and at this point, Ike Perlmutter still has a massive amount of control at Marvel. And one of his main things he does, since we're talking about the Fantastic Four, is he gets rid of the Fantastic Four. Because at this point, Fox was... What?
We probably need to explain who Ike Perlmutter is, because, he is the guy that used to own Toy Biz, and he was partners with Avi Arad. Him and Avi Arad, merged with Marvel in the 90s, and Ike Perlmutter takes over the Marvel side and is essentially the guy that's the chief executive that's running the Marvel Comics Entertainment Group. And so he had a lot of sway at the time over Marvel, and at one point was one of the largest shareholders in Disney stock when Disney bought Marvel. So that's how he was able to continue and consolidate his power. So eventually, his power has significantly waned, and basically he's now nothing more than a figurehead. But at one point,
in 2015, he still more or less ran the show at Marvel Comics.
Yes.
Axel Alonso still ran the day-to-day things, but as far as broad editorial edicts, Perlmutter still had a significant presence, which is why in 2015, because 20th Century Fox, before they were owned by Disney, had a Fantastic Four movie coming out, and Perlmutter didn't want the comics to reflect something that he didn't own. The Fantastic Four were shoved aside, and a sort of similar fate awaited the X-Men, because Perlmutter didn't want to compete with Fox for X-Men exposure. So what he did instead was, you can see the priming for this in 2014 after Hickman's Infinity arc, was resuscitating the Inhumans as a brand. Medusa was the queen of essentially a marginalized group on the run from persecution. Essentially, Perlmutter wanted the Inhumans to be the X-Men, and for a while they marketed less on the X-Men and more on the Inhumans. The X-Men were still around, they weren't gone like the Fantastic Four were, but there was a much smaller emphasis on them as a marginalized group fighting the other, who was dedicated to their extinction. That shifted focus towards the Inhumans. And this culminated, Cyclops was dead. He was mutant Hitler, essentially, but we learned about that later in Death of X. It made no sense. The X-Men were living in limbo because there was an inhuman fart cloud that was killing them. That's a whole story. And Emma Frost was leading a terrorist group dedicated to Cyclops' memory. And after Inhumans versus X-Men, the X-Men were essentially still in the background. The Inhumans were gone. Like, they more or less didn't exist as far as marketing was concerned. because their big push had failed, and the Inhumans were kind of just there. Zach, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. The problem is when you're talking about the X-Men have been the most.
They're one of Marvel's marquee brands.
Yeah, I mean, between the 2000s X-Men movies, which really kind of were the proof of concept. Blade is the genesis of the modern Marvel media, but really the proof of concept was the 2000 X-Men movie, and then eventually Raimi's Spider-Man movies. But without X-Men 2000, studios weren't taking comic book movies and comic book properties that serious. So the fact that, and you got to think, the X-Men #1, the Jim Lee, Chris Claremont launched X-Men #1, was one of the best-selling books of all time.
8 million copies, I believe, is the official number.
Yeah, it was absurd, the amount of copies. Now, granted, that was also during the comics boom of the 90s, which that's a whole different. I could spend a whole video talking about that. But what I will say is this: X-Men, despite what Perlmutter wanted, there was no killing the X-Men. They're the most consistent line of books, and have been for the last 30 years, and really 40 years. Because I mean, even in the 80s, they just were consistently high-selling books. Now, do they get bloated? Absolutely, they have gotten bloated over the years. But
even now, like even in the Jonathan Hickman era, they are bloated, and this tends to happen with anything that gets popular. The corporation goes, "Hey, we should make more of this," and they eventually just start churning it out until it gets overinflated.
And I'm probably a third right now of Marvel's output is X-Men, and that's, I mean, in terms of market share, they're just a huge property. So to not see the forest for the trees, so to speak, of Perlmutter to sit there and try to kill the X-Men and replace them essentially with the Inhumans because they had IP control. Now, obviously, all this changes once the Fox Disney deal happens. But at this point, they didn't. Yeah, to cancel the Fantastic Four, and I still think it was a mistake, but to cancel the Fantastic Four for an extended period of time, not that it hadn't been canceled before because it had been relaunched, 8 times, but to cancel the book that started the Marvel Universe just because you got in a pissing contest with Fox, and granted, Fox did a horrible job with Fan Four Stick, and the Tim Story movies weren't great, but they were okay. They were okay for their time.
But the point is that Perlmutter's cancellation of the Fantastic Four wasn't for a creative reason; it was out of pettiness, more or less.
Yes, 100%.
And this kind of leads us with the X-Men into 2017, 2018. X-Men Red, was it X-Men Blue and Gold and Red were kind of closing off, and what they did was they did a 5-issue mini called Extermination. The original 5 X-Men had been brought by Beast during the, I believe, Bendis imminent all-new X-Men story, were finally returned, and it was revealed that Cyclops, the original Cyclops, who had been dead for, I believe, 3 years at this point, was all of a sudden back, and he'd orchestrated Kid Cable saving the X-Men, or something along those lines. This leads into X-Men Disassembled, where the majority of the mutants are sent away, or the majority of the X-Men adjacent mutants are sent away by X-Man, Nathaniel Richards, into an alternate reality called, it was Age of X-Man, I believe was the branding.
Yeah, the Age of X-Men, yeah.
And they turned once again to the mutant vaccine storyline, which is where a greedy politician / mega corporation creates a vaccine for the X gene, and mutants are on the verge of extinction once again. And so Cyclops, so Cyclops and Wolverine get together. What's left of the X-Men, which is mostly New Mutants, and I believe Zombie Banshee. It was a mess. Matthew Rosenberg made an awful story, and it ended with Cyclops, Wolverine, the recently returned X-Men from Age of X-Man, Emma Frost, Dr. Nemesis, and a slew of others making a final stand against one, which I don't remember it's the Office of National Emergency. They seem prepared to make their last stand. And this happened 3 months after Marvel made a very strange announcement, which is don't remember the exact name of the ad, but it is basically like a weird cryptic announcement of like written on a text, don't mess with the natural order of things, something along those lines. And so people, I remember where I was when I read this. I was in my science for politics class, which is basically like a fundamental understanding of science. And I see that announcement, I'm like, okay, I don't know what that means, but I'm interested. And so I was at work. I was working at a Target at that time. This was when I was in college. And I remember seeing House of X, Powers of X. I didn't really know what that meant. So I looked up and I saw the creative team, Jonathan Hickman and Pepe Larraz and RB Silva. And that was kind of a big deal because previously, oh, hey, Zach's back. Welcome back.
Sorry, the dogs were going nuts and yeah.
Don't worry. I was just explaining where I was when kind of the lead into Hickman's announcement was made. This was back in March of 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, I was shocked, I'll be honest, that he was coming back.
Yeah. And they announced like 2 6-issue miniseries. They didn't announce like what exactly was happening. Or what was going to go on in those stories. Just a lot of cryptic messaging, a lot of Jonathan Hickmanisms, very flowy solicits, vague ideas, and a lot of high cosmic abstract stuff that Hickman shines at. And to put it into perspective, a lot of hype was made around these specific relaunches. For one, the X-Men franchise had been kind of in a marketing rut for a while, so there wasn't a whole lot of emphasis placed on them as far as marketing materials. But here they were with like these brand new these brand new like split down the middle X symbols. All these weird like iterations of past X-Men, like Baby Havoc, this weird lady Rasputin with the soul, this weird lady Colossus with the soul sword, Tycheclops, like all in this beautiful 2-page spread by Mark Brooks. There were even like paper ads plastered in New York City. That was how big of a deal this was. I don't think we'd seen that big of an advertising push from Marvel in like a decade, since like Civil War, and we really haven't seen anything since then. It was a huge push in terms of like, this book will sell.
And you know, for me, I was I'm a Spidey guy, so you know, seeing that the X-Men were getting another push, I had stopped reading X-Men. I had picked up the all new X-Men, the original 5, because I thought that was a very interesting concept of the time displaced.
The Bendis Immonen run.
Yeah, and you know, I enjoyed Bendis and Inman together on Ultimate Spider-Man, so I'm like, all right, you know, I'll try it out.
It was very not good.
It was so, dude. It was so. My biggest issue was it was not that it just wasn't good. It was just so damn slow, and things just took forever to happen. And I could tolerate it.
This was a problem that had been growing since like New Avengers with Bendis. That
dude, I gave away all my Avengers Bendis era Avengers books. I literally started picking it up because Spider-Man was in it, and I thought, oh, you know, as a Spidey fan, I felt like I needed to support my favorite character, and I literally gave them away because nothing of consequence ever happened.
The Avengers show up, fight happen, fight end.
Yeah, and even like with Siege and like when they were doing like stuff with like Norman Osborn and you know, the Avengers versus X-Men book, I really enjoyed that crossover when they're, you know, when they're fighting, and mainly because of Jim Chung. Jim Chung did yeoman's work on that book. So for me, I'm like, okay, you know, now we got this new era with Hickman, and I just hadn't had a chance to pick it up until literally Neil was like, "Hey, you want to help co-host this?" And I was like, "Well, I have been looking for an excuse to pick this book up.
X-Men up, yeah.
I can pop on at Marvel Unlimited and devour as much as I can."
Yeah, so we're going to be going to the Bible for this one. This is the House of X Powers of 10 hardcover. It's got a gorgeous dust jacket by Pepe Larraz. I'm going to make myself solo here real quick.
Sure.
You can see like the X-Men assembled down there. And we'll talk about Moira McTaggart later, but basically everything on there at once, all the new graphic design components, basically a gorgeous summary of what you're in for with this book.
It's something that I feel like we have not seen, and I feel like that in terms of concept, they probably need to do something of a genuine hard reset across Marvel's line, and the way they did that with X-Men, mainly because the stuff that we're seeing right now, Avengers, there's a lot of people that aren't fans of what's going on in Avengers. There's a lot of people that aren't fans of what's going on in Spider-Man. Fantastic Four, I think. I'm excited to see somebody other than, and this is not me just bashing Slott, I'm excited to see somebody other than Slott write Fantastic Four.
Have you not been reading Ryan Nordstrom?
I have not. So
I actually recommend that, sincerely.
Genuinely, I am one of those that I'm like, okay, we kind of, I feel like we're in an inflection point where we need to start seeing not
the X-Men treatment. X-Men treatment needs to be applied to all the Marvel characters.
Yeah, like that was what I felt like. And I felt like Books of X and House of X was kind of doing that, because we saw that with Spencer around the same time they started whenever CB Cebulski comes in, and then they just kind of went away from it for the last couple of years, and it's like, man, I don't know. That's just.
And I'll say this for Slott's Iron Man run, there was at least an attempt to do something different. There was a revamp period where he was trying to do all these new things, and I don't think they worked. But 2018 Marvel was a genuine, or 2018 to 2019 Marvel was a genuinely exciting time to be a Marvel fan.
Agreed.
So, speaking of fun, interesting new things, let's get started. So, issue 1, House of X number 1, The House That Xavier Built. The first thing you'll notice is, for one, this gorgeous new graphic design. This goes out to Tom Muller, who's one of my graphic design inspirations. I've learned a lot from it, just reading on his website, his portfolio. He put a lot of effort into designing the new X-Men style, while also holding the original aesthetic in high regard. And you can tell that later on, but the book begins with a quote: "Humans of the planet Earth, while you slept, the world changed," from Charles Xavier. And the book opens on something that is very un-X-Men, like a tree, a hatchery. And a human hand bursts out of an egg, and a bunch of naked humans crawl towards a man in a helmet with a shape of an X. And the man looks down on them and says, "To me, my X-Men." Now, this is something interesting. So the book begins 5 months ago on what is called Krakoa. And for those of you who know your X-Men lore, Krakoa is a sentient island who is very inconsistent in his portrayal. But basically, he goes back to like giant size. Yeah.
Yeah. It goes back to the 70s. It's giant size.
But you see various X-Men characters, including Storm, Nightcrawler, Armor, Warcrime Man Beast, Kitty Pryde, and the Cuckoo Sisters, all planting various seeds with a flower all over the world. Westchester, the original X-Mansion, the blue area of the moon, Mars, in a callback to his Avengers run, the Garden on Mars, the Savage Land, Washington, D.C., and Jerusalem. And we'll get back to that, because I think that's very thematically important. 2 weeks later, in the Jerusalem habitat, a bunch of politicians arrive and say, hey, we all got this offer from Charles Xavier for a nation state that didn't exist until a few weeks ago, or until 4 days ago. Mm-hmm. And we'll get to that in episode 3 when Charles makes his announcement to the world. A bunch of the politicians are discussing the idea of leverage. This is very un-X-Men like. The idea of money and politics and finance being involved in a book like X-Men. When you're discussing usually social issues, these discussions of money and finance and the politics around it are very un-X-Men like. And you'll notice something else.
Yeah, that's something you see more like with Iron Man and the Avengers in comics. Because of the fact that Cap is was an agent of the
federal government. But you'll also notice something else. This book goes very out of its way in a very post-MCU universe where a lot of stuff has been MCUified for synergy and just because it looks cool. Right. This book is very unlike anything else Marvel was publishing at the time. You'll notice that they're using the Ultimate Universe font. And that's not because it's tied to the Ultimate Universe or anything. Hickman just likes it because, one, it separates it graphically from the rest of the Marvel Universe, but also allows them to put more words per page and per bubble. But like I said, this is very unlike anything else Marvel was putting out at the time. So all these diplomats go inside to see the Cuckoo sisters, Esme and Sophie, and the diplomats believe they are meeting with Charles Xavier, but standing before them in a white cloak is Magneto. And he says, please, Ambassador is fine. And we turn the page, and we get something very interesting. Something that's kind of been touched on in Hickman's works before, but this is the book that kind of made it, took the meme to its exponential. Data pages. These are Hickman's staple, but this is kind of the book that solidified it. And it explains the various plants that Krakoa produces. Human drug L, which extends the lifespan of a human for 5 more years. Human drug I, which is essentially a universal antibiotic. And human drug M, which cures diseases of the mind. As well as for mutants, gateway plants, which only mutants can use. Habitats, which essentially make buildings out of plants. And no places, which are a tumor plant that Krakoa doesn't know about. Essentially creates like a pocket in Krakoa that no one, not even Krakoa itself, knows about. And that's going to come into play later. In Westchester, New York, in the ruins of the Xavier Mansion, Jean Grey, now wearing her Marvel Girl outfit, the green, mini dress, and the gold mask, is leading a group of children through a gateway. Sage and Cypher, who are characters that are incredibly underutilized, are overseeing essentially the TSA of Krakoa infrastructure, allowing all these new mutants in. Jean is essentially our point of view character as she brings the children to Krakoa. And Pepe Larraz does a wonderful job here of introducing like this very vibrant and lush and mysterious world. And one of the children goes off to play with the other children and Wolverine. And Charles looks at Jean and says, "Welcome home, Jean. We're safe here. We all are." And the book brings us once again on their data page to show off Krakoa's topography as well as the various locations around it. Arbor Magna, the arena, the transit, the cradle, the reservoir, the wild hunt, and the carousel. These aren't specifically important now, but the more we get into the X-Men line of books, the more important it's house.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're fine. The more important these locations will become. Meanwhile, off in Hickman's Avengers run, a spaceship carrying a bunch of troops with a strange flower symbol are making a delivery at if you've read Hickman's New Avengers run, you'll recognize this as the Soul Hammer, which was previously used by Tony Stark as a means to destroy worlds that were being hurtling towards Earth on incursions. One of the scientists, dressed in a semi-Amish costume, named Alia Gregor, joins Karima, the Omega Sentinel from various X-Men runs, in a tour of the place, essentially trying to retrofit the Soul Hammer for human population and habitation. And the reason they're here is to build the mother of all master molds, a mother mold. Now, the book explains that this organization is called Orchis, and what they are is essentially a recruitment of assets in a bunch of different organizations: AIM, what used to be SHIELD, Strike, Sword, Alpha Flight, and even a little bit of Hydra. They mentioned that I think in X-Men #1 there are only 6 Hydra agents, but that shows kind of their willingness to ally with very unsavory characters for what they believe is an existential threat: mutants taking over. It's kind of interesting, and I'm going to get into this a little later, that the only real alerts they get are that Charles Xavier buys pharmaceutical companies. That the only reason they panic and form this essentially like Frankenstein death cult is in response to mutants having the money to impact the world. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. At Damage Control, Mystique, Sabretooth, and Toad are stealing data from a Orchis facility, or from an Orchis data terminal, and eventually get attacked by Hickman's favorites, the Human Torch and the Thing. Another data page explains that the majority of Damage Control's inventory is stuff that either Reed Richards or Tony Stark has created and left behind, and that their previous method of preventing Damage Control from possessing it, which was just to sign their property off to each other in case they died, was only able to go through or fell through because Tony and Reed were both missing at the same time, which happened after Secret Wars. Right. The book continues, and this is after Mystique and Toad and Sabretooth make a fast getaway from the Fantastic Four. Magneto explains, we're a culture now. Mutants are no longer just a bunch of ragtag humans. We need our own culture to thrive as a people. And they use the portal network to show off various locations they've created, or various habitats they've created all over the world. And they discuss the tactical perspective of those gates, that they could be used as an envoy of war. But Magneto says, we're not going to use them to fight you because we're giving you the rest of the world and keeping a small portion of it to ourselves. Man is not welcome on the one place we want to call home. And the book cuts back to Mystique, Toad, and Sabretooth fighting the Thing and Human Torch. And Mystique and Toad make it through the portal, but Sabretooth gets caught in a little cube made by the Invisible Woman. And the Fantastic Four notice someone coming out of the portal. It's Cyclops. And after exchanging pleasantries, and even noting that Ben has been married, and this is, I think, relatively recently after they were married. I think like maybe a couple months afterwards. So it was relatively new at the time. So
yeah.
Cyclops says, hand over Sabretooth to me. He is Krakoa's problem, even though Sabretooth killed people on American soil. And they don't fight, but Cyclops basically says, you know what, I get it. You're a little upset about this. So you hold on to him. We'll deal with him later. By the way, your son Franklin, he's welcome on Krakoa any time to be with his real family. And they do another data page explaining what an Omega level mutant is. And you'll notice that there are spattered throughout the data pages are like these red lines that specify like a certain thing you're supposed to be paying attention to. They kind of do this later on with like what they call red issues later on in the expanded material. Mm-hmm. But it is interesting to note that Omega level mutants are now kind of classified as mutants who don't have an upper power limit. Like they have a specific thing that they're incredibly good at, and they don't have an upper limit. There's no measurable fashion in which their power can be calculated. The book cuts back to Krakoa, to the Krakoan habitat in Jerusalem. The Cuckoo sisters, reveal that a majority of the politicians there are not who they actually say they are. A couple are. The Chinese minister, or the Chinese head of the state science office, and the French ambassador are who they say they are. But one of them only sees value in disrupting the economy of the world, and the other only sees value in it because he sees a financial opportunity to buy into Krakoa's drug operation. The Russian ambassador is actually a Red Sky operator, and one of them is an agent of Strike, who isn't actually there for Krakoa. He's there for another guy who is an ex-Shield and Sword Black Ops agent, but he's there for something else. And he has a weapon. Magneto grabs it and tears it apart, and basically threatens the ambassadors there, saying, like, I know what I sound like, and it feels good to say it. A promise is not a threat, and I summoned you to this place for wholly superficial reasons. I needed you to understand you have new gods now. And the issue comes to an end. So,
yeah,
what are your thoughts, Zach?
Look, Pepe Larraz's artwork is phenomenal. I think we need to definitely compliment the amount of work that went in. If you're reading this on Marvel Unlimited, it's 49 pages.
It's a big issue. I believe it was $6 on release.
So it's a big boy. There's beefy. A lot. It's a beefy boy, and there's a lot going on here. Both these issues the first issues are oversized. So
I think they're double sized, aren't they? They're both double sized, right?
Both double sized. I think the other one. The one thing I'll say, if you're reading on Marvel Unlimited, it is annoying as crap that they don't have the ability to read via the arc.
I believe also this is a problem that both Marvel Unlimited and Comixology has, is that they don't have guided view for the data pages.
No, you have to. Yeah, no, the data pages are. There's some guided view, but it's not what you really need.
Yeah,
it kind of just highlights a chunk of it and not line by line. The one thing I'll say on the data page was everybody on the Omega mutant side of things was Krakoan, except for I think Monarch and Frank. So that's an interesting little tidbit.
Well, it shows like how much power they've accumulated in such a short amount of time. It's very good implication of future plot threads.
Yeah.
So I was talking with you about this earlier. This to me feels like the Star Trek The Next Generation of X-Men, like a massive redefining of the brand and the status quo. It depends on how you define encounter at Farpoint, but this feels very much like the broader thing you know and love, but a lot of the smaller details have been changed.
Yes, and I don't disagree with that. I am not a original series fan. I enjoyed the movies, but if you ask me what I prefer, I remember distinctly watching a lot of Next Gen as a kid, and I had the Kenner action figures, and I had the freaking spaceship and or spaceship. I had the Enterprise, and I played with that thing forever. So I don't disagree with your notion. This does. So, I had this conversation a little bit on Voices from the Eyrie when I was on most recently. And if you haven't checked that out, it's available. It's going to be it's already available. You're going to be available
by the time by the time this episode goes live, it'll be there by now.
Yeah. So, because I had Greg on, Greg knows that I am familiar with the property, but I am not
super fan.
I'm not a super fan like Greg and Jen is. So he was really looking forward to hearing my review. And one of the things that I said was, I came into the New Gargoyles comic series cold, and I have some working knowledge of Krakoa, but it's very similar. I'm cold. I haven't gone back and read all this. So for me to come in, I am like completely, the guinea pig. And
that's kind of for me as well. When I first jumped into House of X, I had been kind of on. I was vaguely aware of like the cliff notes of what had happened since I last read X-Men, but I wasn't like intimately familiar, and this was kind of my entryway back in. And so I think it's impressive how this book introduces us to so many new topics, without like having to exposit out the wazoo, or at least making the exposition interesting.
The mark of a good first issue of an ongoing series is how well does it set up the story you're trying to tell. Whenever there's a hard reset or a new era of a book,
like a direction change, yeah,
a fundamental direction change, I don't feel like that I was asking a bunch of questions. I felt like I was starting a journey, and I wasn't having to ask a bunch of, okay, but what about this and what about that? What I felt like, okay, things are going to be explained to me as I go, and I'm going to be caught up like everybody else. Whereas
I think to compare this to the Zeb Wells run of Amazing Spider-Man, I know I've harped on Wells before, but I think you were about to make the exact same point. Hickman does a really good job of setting up the mysteries, like what exactly happened with Krakoa and what happened to the X-Men and why are they speaking like this, while also kind of laying the groundwork down and saying, I'm going to explain this by the end of the series. I think it helps with the issue that the series has like a set end. I didn't.
No, if you didn't freeze, then I'm good. All right, keep going.
But Hickman had like a set beginning and end, so that even though House and Powers will end, it'll branch outwards into the actual X-Men line of books. There'll be answers by the end of like the main things we're experiencing here. And I think that Hickman does a brilliant job of setting everything up to be answered. We know what's the questions we need to ask, and we know what questions we're going to get answers to.
And I mean, when you compare it to like Wells and even Spencer or Brand New Day, even, there's a very clear, concise direction of which the story is going, and you're going to have enough answers by the end of this maxi series.
Mm-hmm.
Which, even though they're two different series, they really function as one.
They're billed as two series that are one. I'll kind of get into this later, but House of X is its own series, while Powers of X is supplementary in nature. Mm-hmm. But they essentially operate as one big series. That's why they're collected in one hardcover.
And frankly, Marvel's tried to do this in the past with like event comics, and it's not necessarily worked out well. Clone Conspiracy is a good example. Where you had Clone Conspiracy, and then if you wanted like the expanded version of like one scene, it was going to basically encapsulate the Amazing Spider-Man issue that came out the following week.
Yeah.
And whereas if you're just reading Clone Conspiracy, you're getting one story, but then it's not supposed to be vital to understanding the story, but it ended up being vital to understanding the story. So, there is a lot. It's a lot in these first few issues, but I felt like that this did a really good job of saying, okay, in the past, you think Magneto's on one side, Xavier's on the other, and look, they're both on the same side. They're both working together.
And it's a shock. Like we share the characters in universe when they're like, oh God, it's Magneto, when thought we were meeting Xavier, and then we realize they're in cahoots together. It's a big deal. And I think Hickman, and I think a lot of it goes to Pepe Larraz. Pepe Larraz's influence on not just his miniseries, but the entire universe of the entire X-Men corner of the universe cannot be understated. He does such a good job like designing Krakoan infrastructure and technology and the biology of Krakoa, as well as the Orchis component, like redesigning the stuff from Hickman's Avengers run, as well as like these Orchis AIM suits. He does such a good job setting up the visual language of this corner of the universe, and I think, unironically, I think he deserves an Eisner Award at some point in his career, or like some kind of like Ringo Award, because he does some phenomenal work here. I think this is unironically maybe his best work ever. I want to talk about the data pages real quick. What do you think of the data pages?
I look. There's a lot of haterade that's poured upon the data pages. Okay, because I gotta read. Why can't I just look at it?
Now, I will defend people who don't like data pages, because later on in the X-Men line, they essentially just serve as like, oh, we forgot to hire the artist for this page. Let's just type in the script and maybe they'll figure it out later. But in this maxi series as a bubble, they do a very good job of visualizing information and showing the flow of information. Now, it doesn't work necessarily in Marvel Unlimited or Comixology when you can't do a guided view, right. But on their own, when you're reading in print, they do a very good job of laying out the information for you.
My counterpoint is I did not read these on my tablet, so I think if I read this on my tablet, it's a different story. I did read this on my, so maybe if I read them on my tablet where I have a much more screen real estate to read it, then that might be an entirely different, set of animals.
Yeah. I do like the idea that Hickman says that something is kind of wrong here. This kind of lends into my theory that Krakoa wasn't supposed to go as long as it has, and it was supposed to end back during Inferno. But I like the idea that like the way characters speak, like Cyclops, the way he speaks to the Fantastic Four, he's just enough in character that like the characters, oh hey Cyclops, we're happy to see you, buddy. Thanks for saying Mazel Tov. And then they realize something is wrong. The way Cyclops speaks about Sabretooth and then goes, hey, Franklin's welcome with his real family, it lends the idea that something is wrong. Mm-hmm. Like that like the X-Men are on top, and the reasons why are kind of sketchy, but they kind of don't let you in on it until later on. And I think Hickman does a brilliant job setting that up through dialogue without just like saying, here's what's wrong.
Yeah, no, like that whole little bit. I mean, considering
it's very in character for Scott, especially after like after the Bendis era, where he was essentially a terrorist for a while.
Yeah, it's also very it also bleeds into the overall history of these two properties together, and how it is complicated that Franklin is an Omega level mutant, and at one point,
and he's valuable to the X-Men. That's why they want him so bad.
Yeah, he's very valuable, so valuable that like Magneto and Xavier's like their minds melded together and became a construct known as Onslaught, and that was the whole apex of the Onslaught story.
And that's why they want him later on in the X-Men and Fantastic Four crossover that we'll talk about later on in the podcast. But Hickman does a very good job of setting up these various plot points to be executed on later. Yeah. So I think now is a good time to talk about Powers of X Powers of 10 number 1. That's important, is that it's Powers of 10, not
Powers of X.
Powers of X, yes. So this book is structured a little weirdly. It is structured in like increments of 10 years. So it begins with year 1, the dream, year 10, the world, year 100, the war, and year 1000, essentially exponents of 10. So the book begins in year 1. Xavier is walking through a fair. I don't know what it is, but essentially he's at a carnival. He's looking up, seeing the birds. He's entranced, and then all of a sudden we see a woman come up to him. Good afternoon. This is Maura McTaggart. And he doesn't know her name yet, but she explains to him like, the magician, the metamorph, the great sword, essentially the magician, the tower, and the devil. She's using tarot cards as a framing device for what she has seen. And Charles says, I had the most wonderful dream recently of a better world. And Moira responds, and this was heavily pushed in advertising. Here's the thing, Charles. It's not a dream if it's real. Why don't you read my mind, Charles? Read my mind and see. And Charles reads her mind and goes, ah. And cuts the titles page, The Last Dream of Professor X. Cut to year 10 on Krakoa. Mystique is arriving back on Krakoa and arrives at the House of M, which is essentially Magneto's house. Magneto basically says, give me what you stole from Damage Control, and she gives it to him. And she says, wait a minute, I have demands, and we'll get to those later. Xavier steals the USB drive from her, and Mystique goes, well, hang on, we had a deal, dude. And Charles is like, we're building a better world, and everyone who would live in it owes something. Your debt will be paid later. Cut to year 100. A mutant who looks disturbingly like Cypher is being, I guess, scanned by a woman in a weird hunter's mask next to what is called in concept art the Theta Sentinel. I don't believe they ever mentioned the name of the Theta Sentinel in the actual book, but that's what it's named in concept art, so we'll call it there.
Yeah, I also heard it was called Marvel Legends called it the Tri-Sentinel, because that was the build-a-figure for the.
I believe I'm just going off of the concept art that RB Silva wrote in. Also, by the way, the art has changed to RB Silva on the art team. I forgot to mention that. But I believe the colorist is still Marte Gracia.
Yeah.
So the other mutant who looks sort of like No Girl, is that the one? Is that the floating brain No Girl?
I don't remember.
Yeah, basically, this mutant known as Silobel is being interrogated by the Theta Sentinel for information, and out of nowhere we see a woman who looks like Colossus but with braids and a red Nightcrawler trying to coordinate saving her. I believe the red one is Percival. The red Nightcrawler is Percival, and the she Colossus is Rasputin. And Rasputin leaps into the fray, trying to convince Percival that the machines have no soul and that the humans lost theirs a long time ago. Rasputin is basically fending off all of the human hunters while Percival opens the gate, and Rasputin displays a ton of massive feats. Like, she uses her soul sword to destroy a sentinel's hand, and but eventually she can't hold the line forever, and Silobel gets captured, and Rasputin has to be dragged through the portal by Percival. And it cuts to another data page that has a diamond instead of an X. This is how you differentiate who wrote the logs. The X ones are written by Xavier, and the diamonds are ones by Mr. Sinister. And it basically explains that these characters are all chimeras. It uses Rasputin 4s as kind of a framing device of, to Quentin Quire, Colossus, Bane. Is it Bane? I don't know. Who's the mutant with the last name Bane? I think it's Wolfsbane. I don't know. Yeah, Kitty Pryde and Laura Kinney to basically create a sort of hybrid mutant with all these powers. And I gotta say, I love the design of Rasputin. Easily the best one of these weird chimeras. I'll get to that later, but I kind of feel like this design was wasted on just an alt history version.
Yeah.
Eventually, we cut to the Tower of Nimrod the Lesser, the human machine monolith. And we see a redesigned Nimrod, who, if for those of you who aren't aware, Nimrod is essentially like a miniaturized Sentinel. But he got a drastic redesign in this version. He's a lot less blocky, more curved. and he's assisted by the Omega Sentinel, who you recall was in the first issue of House of X.
Right.
The human hunters bring Silobel before Nimrod, and they're like, "Hey, we want some more reward." Silobel is resisting and saying, "If it takes 1,000 years, we will endure and erase you from existence." And Nimrod is surprised and jovial. For historically, Nimrod is kind of just a sentinel, but smaller. He has no real personality. But here he waxes a lot of poetic. He basically says, "I'm so sorry for what we did to you, mutants. I'm embarrassed of and ashamed of what we did in the name of expediency and annihilation." That's the spirit. I love it. And the a bunch of green goo tanks rise out of the ground, and Nimrod's basically begging Omega Sentinel to let him do it, to let him grab her with the weird metal tentacles and dunk her in the tank. Nimrod's expressions are precious in this book. I gotta say, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
And essentially, it's gonna break her down, and kind of. It's sort of like the universal solvent. It's going to break her down to her base components so they can study her for later. After a data page explaining the kennel, which are sentinel mutant breeding camps meant to kind of understand how mutant chimeras tick, we cut to a no place hub where Rasputin and Percival are discussing the morality of leaving behind Silobel. They arrive on Krakoa to find a bunch of mutant hybrids. I believe one of them is Black Tom Cassidy and Krakoa as a conscience. Zorn, I guess a Polaris Magneto hybrid, and just Wolverine. It's just Wolverine. Don't ask questions. It's just Wolverine. But the majority of the mutants there's only like 10,000 mutants left on a data page. Two main colonies exist in Shi'ar space. One is named Benevolence, which is just a converted train station, and the current number there is 8,000. The second mutant colony is on Chandalar and is less than 2,000 mutants. Essentially, they serve as warrior stock for the Imperial Guard. But there's only 8 mutants left on Earth, and now it's cut down to 6 by the loss of Silobel and what was the other one? Oh, Percival was the Percival was the one whose cipher, like, I don't know this one. It's Priest, I believe is the name. Because I can't comprehend anything. In year 1000, we cut to the archive of Nimrod the Greater, the mutant library, where Silobel is still decomposing. A blue man named the Librarian is using what looks like a modified version of the Cerebro helmet to try and save the mutants. Essentially, they live in a technologically advanced, like, post-scarcity universe, and they overlook what is called the Preserve. And the Librarian says it's why we keep our dinosaur bones around, as a reminder of what we overcame, something to point at and to hope to God they never have dominion again. And it's 2 people in an enclosure together. That concludes issue 1 of Powers of 10.
Yeah,
or Powers of 10. Yeah, Powers of 10.
Powers of 10. Oh, I forgot to change the
That's okay. I mean, this is mostly a audio medium, so
yeah, I know. But we are going to be
so I kind of mentioned this a while back before we started talking when we recorded. This one feels much more like an ancillary issue.
Agreed.
It's good, but it doesn't have the same kind of coherence that House of X does. And we'll get into that later, that House of X feels much more like its own self-contained story, but this feels more like added context and material to build upon.
The scene with Charles and Moira, I felt like was the biggest thing that grabbed me. Like, okay, like I know Moira is somebody that has had a long history with the X-Men,
has a very established presence, and she's been gone for a while. I think she's been gone since what, 05?
Probably. So to see Moira, playing a role is interesting to me because, like, for me, like, I remember Moira in the films, especially the post First Class films with Fassbender and McAvoy.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, I don't know her extensive history, and obviously she plays a role in the current Zeb Wells books with Spider-Man. So, like, I kind of know where her story goes a little bit, but, like, all right, fine.
You're gonna have okay. I'm gonna be honest. Connecting where we are right now to where we end up by ASM number 9, you're gonna be so confused by the time we get there.
Sounds like the X-Men in a nutshell. I'm confused.
Wow.
Anyway, but
the majority of this issue takes place in year 100, which I thought was interesting. I guess it's because the year 10 stuff, which is the Krakoa stuff, is mostly in House of X, so they don't feel a need to cover it as much. So it does provide a much better framing of year 100.
Agreed.
And I feel like year 1000 serves right now mostly as a bookmark, as a bookend in the exponential framing.
Yeah.
Not necessarily like as an important part right now, and it will become important later. But year 100 is clearly what the book is focusing on right now. I gotta say, I love Nimrod in this book. I've never been a huge what?
Yeah, like the funny thing is, it's like I see these characters and I'm like, oh, because like the Sentinel that they made with Marvel Legends, the design of it is based off of this issue.
Yeah,
like the aesthetics that they use are based almost entirely on this. So the fact that I'm seeing this and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember when they were talking about the
that's where it came from.
Like, I'm like, oh yeah, it was in this book, and I'm like, yeah, no, that definitely looks like, because if you've not seen one of those things in person, they are some of the best things that Hasbro's done for Marvel Legends.
The House of X line.
The House of X line, they've done a really good job. They've done a really good job with the Sentinel. Galactus is also up there, but like this, I mean, just this though, design work and translation from page. I'm not collecting that. I am only collecting like the Jim Lee era, because that's like my era of X-Men. But like that, they've done a really good. X-Men fans should not gripe.
You guys eat well.
Oh, dude! Like, if you're an X-Men fan,
if you were an X-Men fan in 2015, I kind of get your gripe. But now you're eating well, so don't complain.
The amount of stuff, because for the and part of it is they're making up for lost time, because they never stopped making Spider-Man stuff, they never stopped making Avengers stuff, they never stopped making MCU stuff, but they weren't making X-Men and Fantastic Four stuff. So now it's a lot of making up for lost time, and so like it's like a straight from the hydrant amount of just stuff that's now being pushed out, and they did a good job. I remember getting you the Cyclops from that era.
I've got it in my bedroom. I'm taking it with me to Austin.
Seeing those and the Marvel Girl designs and the Wolverine design,
the Magneto design, it looks fantastic in Hasbro in Marvel Legends form.
That entire one wave that they did was just really good. And then talking about the whole reason I'll bring that up is I'm looking at Nimrod. I'm like, oh, dude, they did a good job on Nimrod too.
They should have made him a Build-A-Figure.
Well, they made him a part of a 3-pack.
Oh, this version of Nimrod?
Yes, he was a 3. Yeah, he was a 3-pack.
Was he the one with a Mega Sentinel?
Mm-hmm. I can't remember the other one, what the other figure was, but like it was characters from books and
House and Powers.
Yeah, I keep saying Books of X because that's the name of the show.
I did too good of a job naming it.
Yeah, because coming from House of X and Powers of X. So
I did want to touch upon. Oh, sorry.
For me, this was a fun, and Nimrod was kind of. I was like, what? I thought Nimrod was a Sentinel. I was expecting him
that's really good because I think they do a really good job of establishing that like Nimrod is a Sentinel, but he's evolved into essentially being a person who waxes poetic about like he's sort. I'm trying to think of a character who's like this, where they wax poetic to kind of assuage their guilt. They don't actually really care. They just kind of want to make sure their victims don't feel bad before they die.
Very dumb.
I love this iteration of Nimrod though. I like his moments where he like schizo bounces between being like an evil like tyrant and being like a little child where he's like begging Omega Sentinel to let him dunk the mutant in the goo pool.
Yeah, like there's some weird complexity with that character. So like I was like, all right, cool. I'm in.
I also kind of want to touch on the Chimera mutants, Rasputin, Priest, Percival, Silabel. I don't think there's an uninteresting design in any of those four. I think once you get to the ones on Asteroid K, those ones aren't as good. But I think that each of the Chimeras do a very good job of establishing who has what powers. Rasputin obviously has the soul sword, so there's a bit of magic in her. And like the metal skin is Colossus, but I think these designs are amazing. I kind of wish they'd gotten integrated into the main X-Men run somehow, because I feel like just wasting these designs on a miniseries was tragic, because these are phenomenal designs.
Yeah,
especially Rasputin. I think Rasputin is like one of the best things to come out of this miniseries. And she's actually coming back in Immoral X-Men, one of the Sins of Sinister tie-ins. So that's interesting. I don't know how it's gonna work, but I'm kind of interested to see how it works. I think RB Silva does a really good job building on the aesthetics that Pepe Larraz established. Like you can very clearly see like his work on Krakoa itself, and then how it evolves into like the war-torn hell that we see in Year 100. It's very interesting to see like that very organic architecture evolve into like Nimrod's tower, where obviously the humans have won, but the mutants' influence is obviously felt in their architecture. Like the tower itself like feels like the inside, at least the outside is very geometric, but the interior is very curved and all these bulbs of energy. It's there's a lot of Krakoa in it, and I appreciate that kind of philosophical reminder that no matter if the machines win, mutants kind of came out on top because their influence is still felt even like 100 years later.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess in terms of personality, the Chimeras are also. Oh, what was that?
I was trying to take a behind the scenes
photo. Oh, okay. I think they do a good job, at least with those main four. The ones on Krakoa when Rasputin and Priest return aren't as interesting, but I think we get a very good sense of all their personalities. Like Rasputin is very fight now, ask questions later. Percival is a pacifist who doesn't want to fight but understands the kind of need to avoid extinction. Silabel is sacrificed for the cause. Percival is just a body to be tossed on the fire. He's not really that important. But you got Wolverine there. Quiet dog. I'm not sure how I feel about Year 1000.
My dog's been barking. Yeah, Year 1000 is like I am far more interested in year 1, year 10, and year 100 than I am 1000.
I get the sense it gets more important later on, like I said, but I feel like this was mostly just serve as a bookend rather than like as an actual plot location, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I do like the idea of Nimrod just being reduced to like this little floating drone. Like he's that insignificant that he's just like a little robot now. He just kind of follows the librarian.
Yeah, that part I a little amusing.
Yeah, and also he's lost a lot of his personality.
I know.
Which I think was intentional on Hickman's part. Like Nimrod with his body is meant to be this big imposing child robot, whereas this one's just lost a lot of its personality, and it mostly just serves as like storage. He has no real purpose other than just to collect storage and data. And we'll talk about the two mutants inside the dome, inside the preserve later. But I feel like that's just for something shiny for us to point at. I think we can move on to issue 3 now, or chapter 3, which is House of X number 2, the Uncanny Life of Moira 10. First off, I gotta give Pepe Larraz a lot of credit for this cover. It's phenomenal. It's brilliantly laid out, but also tells us a lot of information without giving anything away. Like these various what ifs of Moira that are going to be important later on, as well as all the other major characters in House of X. I think it does a very good job of conveying information. So the book begins with Moira falling ill at the age of 13. She had very little chance, but the next day she's better. She's right as rain. It's a miracle. Years later, she marries, becomes a school teacher, and has 3 children. And she eventually dies at the age of 74 in her sleep. She had a good life. Unextraordinary. But then something happens. Her second life begins. And even though she didn't know it, Moira McTaggart is a mutant. Big drop, big bombshell. Hickman unfortunately falls into the trap that later books will fall into, of putting exposition in data pages, just like a line, a big blob of text on a page. In her second life, Moira attends university, ran controlled experiments, and she discovered that if she simply performed as she did in her last life as a passive participant, then everything would basically happen as it did before. But if she became an active participant, her life would diverge. And later on, she doesn't have that same life of normality and banality that she has in her first life. She sees a man on the television named Charles Xavier, and she realizes she's also a mutant, and she goes to meet him, but her plane crashes in the ocean. Her third life begins with her becoming a scientist. He doesn't like Charles Xavier in this version. She sees her mutation as a disease, and with a team of scientists on Muir Island, is it Muir Island?
Yeah.
She finds a cure, but that cure ends in tragedy when her entire team is slaughtered by the Brotherhood, led by Destiny and Mystique. And Destiny uses her powers of precognition to see into the future. Basically, Moira has 10 lives, maybe 11 if she makes the right choice at the end, but that's it. And Destiny asks the question of will you experience how will you experience being at the end like everybody else? And Destiny burns her. Destiny has Pyro set her on fire and burn her alive. In her fourth life, Moira basically gets right to work. She throws herself into understanding what would be eventually called the mutant human dilemma. In this universe, she gives Charles Xavier a second look, and they begin a new life together. This timeline is kind of the closest one to 616. Through the 05 to the giant size X-Men to the Avengers versus X-Men until the very end when Charles and Moira face down a Sentinel together and die together. Life 5. She meets Charles a decade before they're supposed to meet. Instead of a school, he basically develops a small army, and they hide together in the biodome from Pauly Shore's biodome. until Bolivar Trask sentinels come to lay waste to it. She spends her 6th life eradicating the Trask bloodline, but no matter what, the machines are inevitable, and they come and take her down, and she basically becomes radicalized. In her 8th life, she goes to Magneto and basically says, "Hey, I'm going to show you everything." And he flips out and he tries to wage Armageddon, but in a show of unity, all of Earth's heroes unite together to stop Magneto from destroying the world. And eventually, Moira turns to Apocalypse, Big Pocky, Big Cheeks, and to Moira, he's the only solution that she has not tried, and together they face down Nimrod to the end. And in her 10th life, Moira decides to break all the rules, and this cuts to Powers of 10's number 1's year 1, where she meets Charles and says to read her mind, and that the dream isn't a dream if it's real. And this beautifully put together data page spans 6 pages, I believe. Shows all 10 of Moira's lives except for life 6, which is mysteriously censored. We'll come back to that later. There's your big mystery, guys. All right. So, Zach, what did you think of House of X number 2?
Very much interested in Moira now. Like this origin story. I am a sucker for alternate timelines and alternate universes and like alternate history. So like for me, this is like, oh, this is like delectable for me. Like I want to know more.
I'm sure there's someone who's like a huge Moira McTaggart fan who hates this. I love it. I'm not a particularly huge X-Men fan, but the twist that I understand, like the lack of not wanting the X-Men's only real human presence to be a mutant all along. But I think this gives her a lot more dimension, as well as kind of an unseen radicalization. She reminds me a lot of Magneto in that respect, that she's, and it's even later on when she's been radicalized to the point that she goes to Magneto and eventually escalates to Apocalypse.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that she basically becomes Sheepocalypse.
Yeah. The design was kind of cool. I liked that.
I like all those little alt designs where like she becomes like a assassin to kill all the Trasks. I think that's an interesting look. The mystery of Moira's 6th life will come into play later, and it'll be answered, I think, in the next episode. So you don't have to wait too long for that one. But I think it's interesting, like the similarity of Life 4, where they basically stand together through. It's essentially Earth 616 before the Sentinels just win, and how different some of them are. The timeline with Mystique and Destiny, the timeline with killing the Trasks, the timeline with essentially like biodoming all the mutants. It's very interesting seeing like how all these different timelines are and what could have been. I think Human does a really good job of illustrating the differences between those timelines. I think the main point is just Moira McTaggart is now the linchpin of Krakoa. Like it's very obvious that like later on Moira will become more tied into the actual origin of Krakoa, but it very much lays the seed for her to be there. I think this is the one with like the least data pages per issue. I think there's only like the 2 pages of exposition and then the like 6-page spread of all of her past lives, as well as the House of X, as well as the one that begins in year 52. I don't know. There's a lot to say about this issue, but not a lot to actually say about it. So I think that'll get us to our last issue of the night, Powers of 10, number 2. So the issue begins in year 1 with Moira and Charles going to Island M in the Bermuda Triangle to talk to Magneto. Charles basically says that to trust him, and he uses his powers to show Magneto what will happen in all the timelines. And basically they go, Magneto, we have an idea, join us. And Magneto says, I won't sympathize with you. If you falter, I'm not going to give a crap. And Charles says, okay. And they shake hands. We are together now, you and I, chapter 4. In year 10, Cyclops is brought to Charles and Xavier, Magneto, and they reveal Orchis to the X-Men, essentially. Basically going over the exposition that we got in issue 1 of House of X, that essentially like a bunch of evil scientists and, hammer, sword, shield, and aim operatives all splattered together with a bit of Hydra in there, just to make them a little bit more evil in case you weren't convinced. And Cyclops is kind of... Oh, whoops.
I'll be right back.
Okay. And Cyclops is kind of speculating on what is the point of all this, and Xavier says that this is where Nimrod becomes operational. And Cyclops goes, oh, damn. Xavier and Magneto basically press the issue. They have to be stopped. This is basically going to be a suicide mission. Can such a thing even be done? One of my favorite Cyclops moments, where Cyclops says, does it need doing? Xavier says yes, and Cyclops replies with, then it will be done. Cut to year 100. On Asteroid K, Wolverine brings in Cardinal and Rasputin to brief their boss on the data that they retrieved. And they hand it over to what turns out to be Apocalypse. The data that they have on that drive is so valuable that Apocalypse would have sacrificed everybody because it means that much. Back at the tower, Nimrod realizes they stole an indexing device. And the hunters basically talk smack to Nimrod, and he just blows them away. Big boom, big beam, pew, pew, kills them. Nimrod has a conversation with his skull, with the skull of one of the humans he killed, and exposits that the chimeras encrypted themselves, essentially made them invisible to the machines, and kind of ponders what they're looking for. The chimeras realize that they archive every moment of everything, and they didn't get what they actually needed, but if Krakoa can decrypt it, they'll know where they're at. And we basically get some dialogue between, I guess, Black Tom and Zorn, discussing like their kind of their minor personality traits. While is it Krakoa? I guess it's Krakoa / Black Tom. The only information they needed was is basically locked behind an impenetrable fortress. And Wolverine says that they're going to fight their way into a suicide mission. Zorn is excited, and Apocalypse says that it's a promise whose guarantee is assured, for I will lead you. He's going to lead them into the heart of the apocalypse. Another data page explaining what Nimbus is. It was once called Nibiru, and it basically explains that Nimbus was housed in a Nimrod shell, and it achieved world mind status 10 years after impact. And it explains later on what the importance of a world mind is in the technological hierarchy of the machine state. But Nimbus consumed and converted the iron and nickel core into memory foam and logic crystals, essentially making it, I believe it's not the origin of the phalanx. In year 1000, we cut back to year 1000. The librarian and Nimrod the Greater are approaching are attracting universal predators. That's the end state of their society. And Nimrod says, "Did it work?" I think we're about to find out as a black cloud of particles arrives on Earth. The librarian approaches it, and it turns into a group of phalanx. For those of you who aren't aware what the phalanx is, if you know what warlock is, it's essentially a childish version of those. And it asks what the Terrans seek, and they reply with ascension. And there's another data page explaining the different tiers of societies, going from machine to hive to intelligence, and then technarch, world mind, and phalanx, with phalanx being kind of the end state of a machine state. With a data page, I wish I could display here showing the kind of, not pyramid, but the evolutionary line of technology. Cutting back to year 100 at the temple. Oh, thank you, Zach. Cutting back to the year 100 at the Temple of Concordance. I guess this weird priest dude says, "You must reject your humanity, every last shred of it." They take a little baby, and a little orb shoots the baby with a little beam and converts it into like a half machine cyborg creature. When an explosion rocks the facility, the X-Men are here. Zorn, Polaris Magneto combo, Rasputin, and Cardinal. Zorn looks on and says, "I had hoped for more from humanity, a little more pride, a little more grace." And Rasputin replies, "Yet here they are in all their glory." And that's the end of issue 4. Zach, what are your thoughts? You're muted.
My apologies. This one is where it got a little weird for me. I was like,
yeah, the year 100 stuff feels very exposition heavy. I did like a twist that Apocalypse was the guy leading the X-Men in the future. It feels very on brand for him.
Right.
At least for Hickman's iteration. We'll talk about Apocalypse later on in the main X-Men book when we get into Dawn of X. But I feel like this is very in character for Apocalypse, that he's like the end state and he's fighting essentially an existential battle against the machines. And I like how Hickman moves away from the humans versus mutants into mutants against machines. Right. And he kind of sets the stage for later plot points that the machines will always win. Even going into the year 1000, where do the blue people have a name, or is it just kind of just Terrans? Is it just humans but evolved? I don't know. I think that's the point, is that like they're so far beyond us that like they don't have like an actual biological name, but that essentially they just want to join the phalanx. They just want to join the big machine up in the sky. And by that logic, the mutants will never win. The machines win. Not even the humans. The humans never win. The mutants never win. It's just the machine. I think that's the important takeaway that he kind of spells out in Powers of X number 6. But this is where it is basically seated in terms of thematic relevance, that the machines will win, not the humans. I think it is hidden behind a little bit more flowery dialogue. Like you said, this is where everything kind of gets a little complicated, and this is where Powers of 10 kind of falters as far as being its own story. It's very, very supplementary to House of X.
Agreed. And the fact that we have like a reading, if you're reading the individual issues, you'll see how there's a reading order, and you want to read like the next episode that we talk things, we'll start with Powers of X and then House of X, and then it kind of go back and forth in the reading order.
Yeah.
So, like in this one, it was very House Powers, and then starting with the next one, it's going to be Powers House
Powers. Yeah.
So, definitely one of those things where if you're reading this, follow. There is a event reading order, but it doesn't go between the two. It stays within the actual confines of the series, which is highly annoying.
Yeah.
If you're, for example, I'll give a Spider-Man example because we're the Spidey Dude Network.
Yeah.
If you're trying to read Maximum Carnage, you have to go between 5 books.
Mm-hmm.
Unlimited are the bookends, right? But then you have to go, web, amazing, adjectiveless, spectacular, and then you got to go back to web, amazing, adjectiveless, spectacular. It's not coherent.
Collected, it works a lot better in terms of like combining the two. But if you're reading, if you're reading this happened when I was reading it in single issue format. A bunch of my friends became confused because like they read House number 3, or they read Powers of 10 number 2, and then House of X number 3, and they read Powers of 10 number 3, and they're like, wait, what the hell just happened? Did we go back or?
Yeah, like you have to follow the reading order, and that's one of those things where you don't normally see that. So,
and if they had done it as like a 12 issue series of just one series, I think would have gone over a lot better. But I can understand why they why they put one on one rail and then one on another. I just think maybe they should have changed the reading order a little bit.
Maybe. But like I say, I mean, this one was one that I was like, feeling a little lost. But I feel like I'll get back on track because like I said, I just read these. I'm going to go in and read the sections that we're
by the order I'm giving you. Yeah.
And that way, I am tunnel visioned, because like I even find myself doing that a little bit with Make My Mayday, where I'll keep reading, and I'm like, no, I just need to focus on what I'm doing. So, by the time this comes out, new episode of Make My Mayday will be out. We'll be almost wrapped up with. In fact, no, next episode we're wrapping up Amazing.
Yeah. So then you don't go into spec, right?
Then we will. We won't go into like the spec miniseries. We're going to go into the Amazing Spider-Man family spec era, where it was a backup to Web of Spider-Man and Amazing Spider-Man fan. So,
also something I wanted to touch base on is that I like that Hickman doesn't give the game away with the language. Like you see the Krakoan markings all over the place, especially in the first issue of House of X, but they don't tell you like the language. Like it was actually really fun because when I was reading the issue for the first time, I was in a group with a bunch of friends and we were trying to decipher what the language said. I thought that was really fun because like we would take the first issue and then go to Powers, because the when it was coming out in single issues, it would have like the title of the next issue in Krakoan, and then we would read it in English when the actual issue came out, and we would go back and figure out what letters were which. We get to piece together the language itself. I thought that was a really fun user experience or a fun reader experience, and it's a very like you had to be there kind of moment, because nowadays like the Krakoan language is everywhere.
But
by design,
it's one of those things too. When I think about languages, I in literature, like created languages, I think of Tolkien, and I think of how he was a linguist and he created the elf language and all these things, and I kind of get that similar feel with it being a mutant mythology with the Krakoan era of X-Men. where
that's a good way to put it. I didn't think of it as like a mythology, but I think that this is kind of a weird immortalization of the X-Men as a, not necessarily as a brand, but as a in-universe culture.
yeah, yeah, because I could see them, to me, adapting more of this than trying to do all the Claremontian X-Men stuff.
Because this kind of condenses it a lot into like a small package, and this is a lot easier to adapt into like a feature film or something like that.
Yeah, because at this point, 2019, was the Fox deal announced?
Fox deal was 2018.
So yeah, so now all of a sudden, Fox deal happens, and it's going. I don't think it closed until 2019.
Maybe,
so,
I don't remember.
I think it was announced in 2018, and then had to go through regulatory processes, which I could sit there and just on the sports side, the Bally Sports situation, which is the direct result of the Fox Disney acquisition.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, Bally Sports bought up all the Fox Sports nets, and now it's a huge problem now because they're undergoing they've ran out of money, and like there's about 12 Major League Baseball teams and basketball NBA teams that's their broadcast home. That if they go bankrupt and don't pay their bills, then it becomes it's a huge problem because the team revenue, all of a sudden, part of the team revenues comes from their deal with the network. And so as a Rangers fan, I'm going, am I going to be able to watch the Rangers? I live in Houston, so everybody's like, "Oh, go Astros," because the Astros are winning. As soon as the Astros lose, then Houston's going to sit there and they're going to turn on their team like they always do.
They're going to go back to the Rangers. But anyways, getting back on topic. I no, you're fine. I think that this was that in the stuff outside of year 100 where everything got really confusing, like outside of like a baby being turned into a cyborg.
Yes.
That was weird. I don't know what the point of that was. I'm going to be honest. Maybe someone can clarify that for me. The characterization for the year 10 stuff was really solid. I love that moment of Cyclops basically saying like, if you need the suicide mission done, it'll be done because I'll be doing it. I love when Cyclops is being portrayed as like not necessarily the uber serious leader character, but like a person who has the confidence and the authority to reassure someone that if it needs doing, it'll be done. I've always appreciated that outlook on Cyclops.
To me, Cyclops and the amount of character assassination that occurred with that character is another good example of the fact that there are no such thing as bad characters, but there is such thing as bad writers.
Mm-hmm. Are we talking about Avengers versus X-Men or
a little bit of that? Because like I understood his opposition to what was going on there, but like the stuff beyond that, when he was just full on like well, of course, when he gets the Phoenix Force and he's like, committing genocide.
I'm solving the world's problems, baby.
Yeah, or he was solving the world's problems by offering a quote unquote final solution. No.
I actually kind of appreciate like his terrorist arc, not necessarily for like the actual characterization, but for where Bendis ended it. They're like, he was like, see, I'm not really a terrorist. I'm doing the Million Mutant March. Look how good I am. I appreciated that end to his terrorist arc. I was a little upset with what they did after Secret Wars, where they just made him like, where they imply he was mutant Hitler, but then like he was actually right the whole time.
Yeah. That's a little weird.
But like Cyclops is one of the few Marvel characters where I have seen like a pretty consistent point A to point B in terms of his story arc. And I think Hickman does a really good job of continuing that characterization and the evolution of his character. Nimrod was still good. He's consistently like the best part of year 100, where he's just like where he kills two people for questioning him, and then like he's like, let me exposition my grand plan to this. Let me exposition what went wrong to this skull. I can have fun with that, huh?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the chimeras kind of devolve into exposition as far as their purpose in the story. They kind of bounce back by the end when they blow up the temple. But I feel like aside from Rasputin and Cardinal and Apocalypse, there's not a whole lot to them. Wolverine mostly serves as a form of consistency from year 1 to year 100. But the other ones, like I finally realized that the Black Tom one was Krakoa as a person.
Oh,
but he and Zorn basically have like a personality trait each, and they fall kind of flat.
Which like Zorn is one of those things. I thought he was Magneto, but like I guess Zorn is a different character now.
It's weird. Don't ask questions. To me, Zorn has never been particularly interesting. He's kind of just Ghost Rider but blue, as far as I'm concerned. Like I said, Rasputin and Apocalypse and kind of carry the personality end of the chimeras.
Yeah.
Which isn't awful. I think those two are kind of the standouts, and I think that's purposeful because they're the only ones that have any real dimension going forward, especially Apocalypse. But since Rasputin's coming back in Immoral X-Men, I think it's worth looking into her. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got all 4 of these issues done. I kind of want to ask Zach, as someone who is relatively not necessarily new, but has a very limited scope on X-Men, how do these 4 issues make you feel? Or how did you feel by the end of these 4 issues?
How does that make you? Are we in therapy all of a sudden? No.
Yes.
Look,
this is my counseling section.
I enjoyed them. I felt like that they worked well. I felt like that it was a great introduction to this new era. And it left me going, okay, I want to read more. And I'm excited to bring my perspective on this show. Like, I wasn't expecting to do this show originally, but like, I'm glad I'm a part of it, at least in the interim. I do want to put a call out. If you are an X-Men fan,
let us know. Let us know your thoughts
on this. To have their voice heard, I get with Neil. You know what I mean? Like, this is his show, so I'm looking forward to seeing what the response is from you guys and all the work that Neil's going to be doing with it, and throwing himself into this is welcome to the jungle, buddy.
This was interesting because like I didn't really have a vision. Like I had kind of a plan, but not really a vision, especially once my original team fell through. Right. So it's going to be interesting seeing how this goes going forward. I think that's going to be the interesting part of this.
You go back and listen to the pilot of Spidey to Experience.
We're in a much different place than we were.
Oh, absolutely. So you kind of have to let the show evolve on its own.
Yeah, and especially how you and I have evolved. Like we went from like doing a show, and now I'm doing my own show. Plus, I'm one of the producers and like the lead designer on the network, and then you've basically turned into the overarching guy.
I am the
ideas are.
Yeah. And it's funny because Chris was asking me about if we're going to do Spectacular Cell show live, and I said that's up to him. I mean, he did it live whenever he was on the Dorkening Network, and we're still going through and we're still getting to the point where we're caught up on episodes, because he was doing that show weekly and now he's doing the show, he's releasing it bi-weekly. So, if we do it live, we'll do it live. But yeah, I mean, we are in a very, very different place as a network. I mean, I just mentioned we're almost through Amazing Spider-Girl on Make My Mayday.
Yeah, you're way in.
We're almost through the first 2 volumes, and we're in the weird phase. We're about to embark on the weird phase of Mayday's existence in the post being in our own series. Like we're almost to 2011, or not even to 2011. We're God, I can't remember when ASG ended, but like, so we're in a very weird place. And then, I'm probably got the rest of this year into next year, depending on what happens with like the Spider-Verse stuff. We have a rough outline of what the rest of this year goes. And then once that's done, then we're done. And so that's when Forgotten Era will start kind of taking off. And this show will continue to like, so like the fact that, the fact in 2009 when we started with Clone Saga Chronicles, I never would have imagined doing Spec Radio and then Make My Mayday. And then, in 2020, when we started discussing, what we wanted to do and how we wanted to expand, like now I'm looking at it in September, we'll, kind of launch the complete year 3. And so that's exciting of this era. And so, we've kind of done a big launch every year. First year outside of Spider Experience, we had Make My Mayday. Second year was Voices from the Eerie and bringing in, ASM Classics, season 2, and then bringing in Salvo Cinema. So now this year, and then this year also the video aspect of Voices and then this show. So we continue to just build and build and build. And if you want to be a part of the network and you got some ideas, I am open for business, so to speak.
Yeah.
So,
by the way, thanks for giving me the opportunity to have this platform. I've kind of had a lot on my mind regarding Krakoa for a while, and not necessarily to say like, oh, I'm going to shill for the era, but like, there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about here.
I agree.
I think it's worth talking about.
Here's my thing, and this is where it kind of gets into like, we talked about you were leaving the Spider Experience because you're not enjoying the books. I'd much rather have somebody on the network that's enjoying what they do and enjoying the things that they're talking about than them staying on a show just because they like staying on the show. Because I've been in that mode, and the negativity aspect of it starts to seep out subconsciously. You're more, I got to be more, bombastic about it instead of being as critical as you could be. It becomes, am I serving the show or am I serving myself? And that's where I was like, when you're like, man, I need to take a step back and focus on this show because we've talked about it. I mean, we talked about it, what, 6 months? Now we're here.
Yeah.
We've gotten past the hurdle, which is episode 1. You know what the next hurdle is going to be? Episode 2. But the gap between the hurdles is significantly less. And, hopefully the people that you had talked to in the past, once they see this, maybe they'll be able to, jump in and come see us and be a part of it. So everybody's welcome. And if you're a part of the Patreon page, you get more of this fun content. So more to come.
Well, and I mean, it's going to come to everybody eventually, but those Patreon guys, you guys talk about it first. Look at you.
You are the
vanguard.
Well, look, you're the reason that the site is alive right now. You're the reason that that I was able to pay, monthly for StreamYard. Now, eventually, I'm going to try to do the yearly fee, and that will be expensive. But you know what? It's fine. It's fine. Because I'm going to do. I'm probably going to do because like there's different steps of StreamYard. So we're on the quote unquote basic plan, but I want to go to at least the pro plan, and be able to stream in more spots. So We can, if we wanted to spin off and make a YouTube page for Books of X, we can do that, where we can stream to both
and tie in, like upload our own material on there, basically.
Yeah, because I just recorded this week a 3-part Ben Riley video that I'll be working on over the next few weeks to kind of give you my thoughts. And t-shirts. I've got ideas, so stay tuned. T-shirts.
Yeah. We might even do what we have in the background for
I anticipated that as being a t-shirt
design. Hell yeah, that's good. But anyways, this has been Books of X, and I guess we'll see you guys next recording. You guys have a great day, okay? Peace.